channel. There are times in life that we just need a fresh start. And when that happens, it can be a little scary, but it always makes a difference knowing that God is in our midst. He's right there with us, and He's there to help us. He won't let us fall. We're going to talk about that in today's video. Let's go. And Justice Reign is our International Sunday School lesson for May 10th. My name is Waynell Henson, and for the past 5 years, I have served you as that Sunday School Girl of thatsundayschoolgirl.com, and I thank you for stopping by to review this week's lesson with me. I pray that God is blessing you wherever you are, that you're staying safe. I know that many of you are starting to return to work and re-engage. It is my prayer that you're taking every precaution to remain safe, and I continue to cover our TSSG family in my daily prayers. Now listen, you heard it in the intro. I warned you last week. You've seen it on my social media that I keep saying the number 5 because I am so excited that God has allowed this ministry to exist and to change the way that people see Sunday school for the past 5 years. I think it's a big deal because a lot of people don't make it 1 year. And yes, there have been times in the journey that I absolutely wanted to give up. And I even told myself, I mentioned this in a video, I told myself just get to 5 years and I would retire the channel. But I do believe that God has put us together for this time. And so I look forward to continuing to serve with you and to connect in meaningful ways. So continue to pray for me. You are stuck with me for a little while longer while we continue to grow as students of God's Word. Listen, if you're new around here, allow me to say welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web. I'm so glad you're here. You are now part of a community that's more than 29,000 subscribers strong. People just like you who love God, love His Word, and we're excited about being students of His Word. There are going to be 4 ways that we're going to get you connected while you're here. The first thing we need you to do is look down below for the word subscribe. Click that button so that you're subscribed to this channel. The second thing is to look for a picture of a bell. That's your notifications bell, and it is going to send you a notification every time there is content uploaded or this channel goes live. There are currently at least 2 videos a week. There is Markup Monday that starts at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. I go live here on YouTube with several hundred people who love Sunday school, and we are here with our Bibles. I share a free template by email, and you are able to download that and follow along, and we use that time to prepare our study plans for the week. And then we come back here on Thursday or maybe the day after and just button up everything as we're preparing to go into Sunday's teaching or class settings. The third thing, I need everyone please do this for me. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it is such an encouragement to me, and it tells YouTube that you enjoy this content. That is to look for that thumbs up button. Click that like button. We're currently the most thumbs up like review of the International Sunday School lesson here on YouTube. So click that button. Finally, anyone and everyone, you're welcome to leave a comment down below. I love hearing from you all. Listen, I'm going to make a separate video announcing some giveaways and fun things and ways that you can help celebrate 5 years with me. I won't use our time for that, but I am going to ask you one thing on this video. I'm willing to do a video giveaway here for those of you who will get someone to subscribe to this channel. I would love by the end of the weekend to hit 30,000 people, and that's very doable. This video normally has at least 10,000 views, and I just need 700 of you to go and get a friend and ask them to subscribe to this channel. If you'll do that, and have your friend leave a comment down below saying that they've subscribed and let us know who sent them. So give your name and their name. I'm going to draw, if we get to 30,000 by midnight Sunday, I will do a drawing for 2 Amazon gift cards, each $50. There's that 5 again. You'll get 50 as the referring party. The new person will get 50 as a new person if you are selected. So go ahead and share. Let others know that that Sunday School Girl is here to serve. So look for that other video. I want you to know that the TSSG notes are down below. The link for those are down below. We're about to get into the lesson. Those are always the first link in the body of the description. That is the notes that will go along with this lesson if you've never seen those before. I also uploaded a new file this week to my selfie site. Many people have talked to me about, as we go into this lesson, we've been talking about justice. Every lesson has been about justice. And I literally had someone say, how much justice can we talk about? The answer is there is always a relevant discussion in the Word of God. And as a teacher, if you're doing all of the talking, you have missed the moment with engaging your students. So I have a second file out there that is just discussion questions that you can raise, and I order them by the scripture breakout so that you understand where that question sort of falls, and it allows you to raise some discussions with your Sunday school classes and make them lively. Peace and justice reign is our lesson title. The Bible basis is Zechariah chapter 8, verses 1 through 8, and verses 11 through 17. The Bible truth. The Lord is jealous for the worship of his people and longs to dwell with them in peace. Our memory verse is verse 15, and the lesson aim is that we will identify the impact of God's presence in a community, yearn for God's perpetual presence and the promise of justice it brings, and pray for God's presence to result in a communal sense of justice, prosperity, and unity. So as I was thinking about sort of the setup of this lesson, there are sort of 3 life events that are listed as the absolute most stressful times in our lives. That is weddings, funerals, and moving. Moving is a big deal. And I'm curious about the farthest that you've ever moved and what was that adjustment period like? I think the biggest move I've made was coming from Kansas City to Dallas, and that was a big move. I was very grateful because it was a corporate move. It was a company move. So, it was interesting because they actually came and packed up everything and the truck met me here. But this is also my second home in Dallas. And so when I moved from my first home to this one, that was very different. The whole packing up process and getting everything boxed and the movers coming and everything that goes along with moving, it can be a stressful time. And I thought about that in the concept of the children of Israel, God's people, as they are moving once again. We've been talking about in this quarter how they were in a period of time where their focus was off. They weren't kind to their neighbors. They weren't administering justice righteously. They were guilty of idol worship, and God allowed them to be taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And last week, we saw a message of hope in Zephaniah that he was going to restore. And now here we are with Zechariah, and we are in that time period as restoration is in process. Restoration, as we discussed last week, it sounds really great. It is a very hopeful message, but even inside of the restoration process, there is work that needs to be done. And that's where we sort of enter the background of this particular lesson as we see God's people and they are working on the rebuilding of the temple. And as they're working on that, their focus starts to shift. They're focused on sort of personal things versus the Lord's house. They get the altar rebuilt and they prepare sacrifices according to the Mosaic law. And it's been some time. It's been at least 40 or 50 years since the temple was torn down by the Babylonians. And here they were now, they were rebuilding, the foundation was there, and they knew that whatever they would build would not compare to the magnificence of the temple before, but the process had begun. But rebuilding is not easy. We talked about this last week. It's not easy. And we're talking about a physical structure. So it was a daunting task. And I'm sure in their minds they were asking the question, is it even possible for us to complete this work? Well, Zechariah brings a message to them. And part of his message is a message of comfort It was an encouragement for them to look at what was ahead, to know that even though they were in the midst of a very heavy assignment, that God had a future and a hope for them. Zechariah prophesied during the same time, or preached during the same time as Haggai, and their messages were very similar. And under their time of ministry, the temple was resumed, the building of the temple was resumed and completed. So again, rebuilding is hard work. It went on for a long time. Morale was low. There was persecution, and they needed to be reminded that God was with them, that there was a great promise of a great future. Remember, as we read these lessons, it's not even just about what God was going to do right then and there, but there are also messages that we should pick up that happens in the future, that in the future time, in the millennium, when God returns, that there is a presence that God will have with his people when he returns. So we'll see both of those things as we get into this lesson. In chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, I grouped those together. Again, the word of the Lord of hosts came unto me, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I was jealous for Zion with great jealousy, and I was jealous for her with great fury. The first thing is, I always like to look at who said it, who's talking. And this is the word of the Lord. Even though it's his prophet speaking, God is using Zechariah as his mouthpiece. But we are so clear that these words are not his own. We see here that this is a message that is coming again. That means it's not coming for the first time. Where else do you see this message? I give you references in your TSSG notes. You need to go back to chapter 7, and you'll find in chapter 7 that there was actually a question that was asked. As they were rebuilding this temple, two messengers come from Bethel, which was a town up north, and they came asking a question. They wanted to know, was it really necessary to continue the fast that was happening in the 5th month? This fast was designed to remember the destruction of the temple, and that had happened years prior. Again, they were 40, 50 years out at this point, years prior that the temple was destroyed. And so here they are. It's kind of hard now that they're rebuilding the temple to see why they need to continue to remember the temple being destroyed. And so they wanted to know, is this necessary? Do we really need to keep doing this? And God responds to their question, and he's responded twice. As we look here in chapter 8, this is actually the 3rd response of God. What are his first 2 responses? Well, in short, his first response was, you were fasting, but it really wasn't about me. You didn't even have your heart fixed on me. The truth is, your temple was destroyed, and that's the only reason you've been fasting for 70 years. And the second answer was kind of similar. When you were fasting, it wasn't really about me. You weren't even treating your neighbor right. You did not know how to love others. And so God was pointing out that all of their fasting had just been for ritual. So here he is again, and this is his complete 3rd answer that we study. In the first 2 answers, God has been very sort of backwards looking, focusing on, where they were weak, where they failed to perform. Now here God looks in a different way. In fact, this intro is pretty powerful. Notice the repetition of, thus saith the Lord of hosts. I think you'll see maybe 8 or 9 times that the Lord of hosts is mentioned in this passage of scripture. When we think of the Lord of hosts, we think about God being the head of all of the heavenly armies, and that there's no power that can stand against him, that he is sovereign. And the Lord of hosts gives this message, and he says that he was jealous for Zion with great jealousy, and he was jealous with great fury for her. What do we see here? That God has feelings. He has emotions. He was jealous toward his people. In fact, not just a little bit jealous. He was extremely jealous. Now, I thought this was interesting because jealousy is, by definition, a feeling of or showing envy for something that someone else has, and that's wrong. But when we think about the use of the word in this context, God is jealous for what already belongs to him. So that is not the same as envying something that belongs to someone else. He was focused on Israel. He wanted her love in return. He wanted her love, her fidelity. He was faithful to her. He wanted her to be faithful to him. And in fact, we always think about there's a thin line between love and hate is the secular phraseology. But here we see something interesting. There's a thin line between love, the jealousy that God has, and his anger. There's a thin line between his jealousy and his anger, because it was that thin line when they pushed it a little too far. Even though he loved her and was jealous for her, when she did not conform and do the things that she was supposed to do, he made it very clear that she displeased him, and he would allow other nations to overtake her. It was the vicious cycle that they always stayed in, and he took action to get her attention and to get her back on track. And so he loved her very, very passionately, is what we see there in verse 3. He says that I am returned to Zion. God had allowed his people to be taken captive by the Babylonians, and his deep feelings for her had not changed. Now that they were coming back into Zion, into Jerusalem, that is the same place for reference. We'll note here that God is not just concerned about the dirt. He's not just concerned about the land. He's concerned about his people. And so he affirms that he dwells in her midst. It is huge to note here that God is present. And it wasn't just about this moment. I am returned. Think about this moment now. And in the future, God will return again for his people. God, in fact, has always been present with his creation. Even go back to Adam in the garden. God was present with his people. So he was there with his people. And Zion, Jerusalem, shall be called. That means in the future, she was going to be called by a certain name. She was going to be called by another name. His people were returning home and putting things back together as best they could. They would be recognized by others in a special way. They were going to be known as, they would be called the city of truth. Thought this was interesting because at this point, truth is not in the city. So that doesn't mean that that's their name now. But even when the Lord returns, they're going to be, Jerusalem is the city of truth. And he's basically explaining that no matter what you've been called in the past, and we talked about this last week, no matter what you were called in the past, empty, desolate, barren, you are going to be known as the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. In verses 4 and 5, we see that they're basically going to go from nothing to something. And here we're looking at population. When they returned from Babylon, not everyone that went returned for all sorts of reasons. There were people who died. There were people who chose to stay, but not everyone came back. And so they were a fraction of the numbers that they were when they returned to their homeland. A fraction of the number trying to do this big, big work. And here God gives them a long-term vision of what their city is going to look like. They'll be the city of truth. And not only that, but their streets are going to be populated. He gives a visual of the city of truth. This is a visual of a city of people who have lived faithful lives. What does that look like? Well, it looks like young and old in the streets. It looks like older people out there with their canes walking around. And when I looked at this was not, the language of the text says that they will dwell in the streets there of Jerusalem. That means that they're going to have free movement. Wherever they are, they're going to be able to come and go. They're going to be able to move. Even with their canes, they'll be able to move. The young and the old together. Boys and girls in the street, full of life, playing without worry. In other words, a safe space for people to be. When I think about our ministries, sometimes people can be a little impatient with children in church or a baby that cries. You know what? As long as I hear babies crying or see a child moving around, I love it, because that means that there is life in that ministry. And so here, children in the street, there would be life in the city, life and longevity. We see the longevity in the seniors. In verse 6, the Lord of hosts says, it will be marvelous in the eyes of the remnant of this people in these days. Should it be marvelous in mine eyes? God has promised some pretty amazing things, to take them from nothing to something, to give them a new name, to cause people to see them in a different way. It all sounds a little too good to be true. It's kind of hard for them to get their minds around. Sometimes when God gives us a promise or lays out his plan or that's why he doesn't tell us everything, because sometimes even the glimpse that he gives us seems just too good to be true. But what he asked them is, just because it's too good to be true for for you? Does it mean that it's too good for me? Is there anything too hard for God would be another way to frame that question. What we'll see here is that whatever would be done, it would be God doing the work through them. They just needed to supply the faith. In verses 7 and 8, God is still talking. Behold means to stop, look, take note. He wants their attention. He says to stop. Behold, I will save my people from the east country and from the west. And I will bring them, and they shall dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God in truth and in righteousness. This is that idea again of God bringing people back together from the east, from the west. Notice that God is the one that does the bringing. Think about in the millennium when God brings back his people. He's the one who's doing the bringing. It's nothing that we do on our own. And again, think about how sparsely populated Jerusalem is now. And here he's talking about bringing together people who were scattered. Remember, they were scattered because of sin. But at this point, their judgment has been satisfied. We saw that last week. And God is going to gather them together again. Not just geographically, but spiritually, he brings them back together. And he says that I will be their God in truth and in righteousness. Again, that is the restoration of relationship with God and his people. God has allowed his people to return and be restored, not just for the sake of the city, but for the sake of their relationship. Again, this is about a present time and a future time, but all to be looked on with hope and with intimacy to see him bringing back those whom he loves. We do skip down to verse 11. And again, God's people are rebuilding and doing hard work, and it's easy to get distracted, discouraged, sort of thrown off when things seem so big. And his people needed a boost. They needed to take courage. They needed to be reminded that the work that they were doing was necessary and to stay the course. They needed to know here that God is the same. He has not changed. People would change, but God did not change. And he even knew that his people would not be perfect. They had a history of messing up. He knew that they weren't perfect, but he was actually going to change the way that he dealt with his people, change the way that he treated them. In the past, he says, this won't be the way that it used to be. Future generations will not be punished for the past. In verse 12, we look now specifically at what that means, that he's going to treat them a bit differently. Well, one thing we see in verse 12 is that he's going to bless them. And the first blessing we see here is a boost in their economy. But he was going to not just give them a stimulus check. He was going to bless them as they worked. And there are some times that God will bless us and increase us as we get in, as we obey, as we do the work. And he talks about the future seed being prosperous. In other words, the blessings that God promised were not just for now, but they were spiritual blessings that would apply in the future. And as we read here, we see three very clear things. There's prosperity, there is abundance, and there is increase. And this just wowed me that God promised prosperity, abundance, and increase in a place that seemed empty, a place that seemed desolate, a place that needed to be rebuilt. So we see a boost to the economy. The second thing we see is a status change in verse 13. It's going to come to pass. It will happen. There's going to be a status change. You were cursed, but not anymore. What people saw in you, that's not going to be what they see now. Why? Because God promises, I will save you. What's he going to save them from? He saves from adversity, from calamity, from their enemies. He was going to save them, and they would be seen as blessed. Not only would others see them as a blessing, I love this part, they were going to have the ability to be a blessing. And that's very different. It's one thing for people to see that you are blessed. It is a completely different feeling when you are able to be a blessing to someone else. And then we start to see language that we saw in last week's lesson. Fear not, and let your hands be strong. Again, this is a lot of information to take in for them. There's a lot of moving pieces, and they're assured through the prophet that they don't have a reason to fear. Whenever we have a promise from God, there is no need to fear. Our job is to trust and to be faithful, but not to fear. Not only don't be fearful, but to let your hands be strong. Keep doing what is right. Keep doing your work. You're not working in vain. Keep rebuilding that temple. Keep working the work of restoration. Let not your hands get weak at what you're doing. I said last week that our hands are an output of what is in our heart to do. And so when you have a lot in your heart to do, you have very busy hands. But when you have nothing that you aspire to do, it's easy to let your hands get weak in the work. And so he says, don't let your hands be weak. Verses 14 and 15, there are more reasons not to fear. He said, don't be afraid. Let your hands not be weak. And here are more reasons to not fear and to be diligent in the work. First of all, they've already witnessed God's capabilities. At one point, it was in the mind of God to bring disaster on his people because of their rebellion, and he decided to do it. And he didn't change his mind. He did just what he said he was going to do. And what he's saying to them is, just like I did that, I've just told you that I'm going to bless you. So just like I was able to fulfill the destruction, I am able to fulfill my promise to bless you as well. Here we really see the message of God's grace. In verses 16 and 17, we basically wrap up God's answer. And here we have a picture of faithfully living daily in what is the city of truth. What does it look like to live faithfully? What does it look like? He didn't want them just to be focused on building a quality place of worship and then not have quality people inside of that temple. He gives special instructions here concerning relationship issues. And there are just ways that we are to treat one another. He has 4 things here. First, to speak the truth. In other words, be truthful with each other. To judge truthfully. That means to render judgment in a way that God would. That's the idea of righteous judgment. The third thing is do not think evil to do evil in your heart against your neighbor. In other words, don't plan to do harm to another people. And this one wowed me because it didn't say don't do harm to your neighbor, but this even talked about having it in your mind to do to anyone else. And finally, don't commit perjury or take a false oath. That means don't lie to each other or lie about each other. And these were all reasonable requests. And basically it boiled down to, these are the things that God hates. And so when I look at my aha here, it was that all of these things had to do with how we treat our neighbors, that we treat each other right. God is concerned about our relationship issues. So again, God wanted them to think about their fasting had become a ritual. He was trying to focus them on right living, focus them on peace and justice reigning, not to just be caught up in the stuff, not to be caught up in a ritual, but to be guilty of righteous living. My last aha is that they were busy building the work, but God was rebuilding his people. And note again that as the church grew, his people would grow and they would be prosperous. This is our lesson for this week. I have a few key learnings. I'll share them with you. They're all printed in the TSSG notes. The first is that God always has a greater plan. Despite what we're going through and what we face and the difficulties that may come against us, God has a greater plan, and it is our job to be faithful, not to fear, and to keep our hands strong in the work that he has assigned to us. Here we saw God's people getting a fresh start. And there are times that we just need a fresh start. And fresh starts are not always easy, but they are certainly more manageable when you know that God has given you this space and you leverage that moment and be reminded that he is with you in the midst of what you're going through. Know that God wants truth, he wants holiness, and he wants faithful living from his people, from those of us who aspire to live as citizens in the city of truth. He wants truth, holiness, and faithful living. Restoration is not just about brick and mortar, but here it was about relationship. And for many of us, relationship is the core of areas that need restoration. And so God is concerned about relationship. Our relationship primarily with God matters. Our relationship with God matters. And then our relationships with each other, the way we treat one another, they matter. We can't just build and fill beautiful buildings and not think about what it means to be quality people of God who are inside of these buildings. And these are the buildings that we know as our worship edifices. We can't just have beautiful churches and not have beautiful people who fill those churches. The quality of our relationship is a reflection of our worship. Our job is to be faithful and continue the work, and God will allow prosperity, abundance, and increase. He builds us as we do the work. We're accountable not only for what we do, but we are accountable for what we think, especially toward our neighbor. The quality of our thought life does matter. The final thing is kind of a challenge to you. As I look at Zechariah, his job was to speak a word of encouragement to people. And there are all sorts of people around us who just need a word of encouragement. And so this weekend, I'm going to ask you to find 3 people that you can encourage, whether you do that by a phone call, a text message, an email, dropping a note in the mail. I want you to find 3 people that need just a quick word. You don't have to talk long, and you don't need to be in their business, just to speak a word of encouragement to them in the space that they are. That's it. That's the lesson for this week. Don't forget to leave me any notes that you have down below. Please don't forget to give the thumbs up like to this video. Remember again that all of your lesson resources, the links are down below. Everything is in the selfie store. I love everybody. I think that's it. I'll see you in Sunday school. Bye, everybody. Wait. I forgot 2 very important things. First of all, happy Mother's Day to all mothers. I pray that you have a wonderful Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day especially to my own mother, Mrs. Juanita Henson in Kansas City, Kansas. I am grateful for you. I celebrate you. I honor you. And for every mother, I hope that someone will show you just how amazingly special that you are. Finally, on Sunday at 10 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time, if you're not already engaged, I invite you to Social Distancing Sunday School. I'll go live here on YouTube at 10 a.m. and it is a great time. Several hundred students are still joining each week while we do a live Sunday school review on our Sunday mornings as we are still social distancing. All right, everybody have a great weekend. Bye-bye.